Why did so many Motown stars die young? The Untold Curse of Hitsville. 12 voices walked into a little house on West Grand Boulevard and helped build Motown into a global empire. But many of them never lived long enough to enjoy the legacy they created. Some died broke, some died sick. Some died broken in ways the history books don't like to mention. And when you line up the ages, the timing, and the heartbreak, it starts to feel like Hitsville didn't just make stars, it chewed them up. If you're ready for the truth behind the Motown curse, hit subscribe right now and stay with Legends of Black Excellence, because this story gets darker from here. The Motown curse begins. Motown didn't begin as a giant corporation. It began as a house. On West Grand Boulevard in Detroit, Hitsville, USA became the place where raw black talent turned into gold, and Berry Gordy became the architect of a sound that changed America forever. But the video opens with an uneasy question. Why did so many of the artists who helped build that empire never live to see old age? Behind the clean suits, perfect harmonies, and chart-topping joy. There was another reality, one where fame moved fast, bodies wore out, and the people who created the magic were sometimes left behind once the spotlight shifted. As the legend of Motown grew, a darker pattern started to feel impossible to ignore. In the story's frame, it isn't just bad luck, it's a chain of tragedies that keeps repeating, almost like the same script playing out with different names. Was Hitsville creating stars, or quietly consuming them? That's the uncomfortable tension driving the Motown curse idea. The same label that manufactured dreams also existed in a ruthless industry where healthcare stability and long-term protection weren't guaranteed for everyone who stepped through those doors. And that's what makes this opening chapter so powerful. Berry Gordy isn't painted as a cartoon villain. He represents the machine, the ambition, the vision, and the business decisions that helped Motown dominate. But the moment you look past the hits, you start seeing the cost of being part of that system. The video doesn't claim the curse is supernatural. It suggests the curse might be the price of building a legacy when the music is valued more than the people making it. And once you notice the pattern, you can't unsee it. Georgiana Tillman, the forgotten pioneer. Georgiana Tillman was only a teenager when she helped make Motown history. Before the Supremes, before Martha and the Vandellas, before the Motown sound even had a name, she and her friends stepped into the spotlight as the Marvelettes and delivered something the label desperately needed: a national breakthrough. Their song, Please Mr. Postman, didn't just become popular. It became Motown's first #1 hit on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1961, turning a small Detroit operation into a movement with real power. In that moment, Georgiana wasn't just singing, she was helping lay the first brick of an empire. But the curse story begins to reveal itself when the camera follows her life beyond the charts. The history books love the victory, but they often skip the cost. Georgiana had been battling sickle cell anemia since childhood, and later doctors diagnosed her with lupus, two conditions that can drain the body even when the person is trying to smile through it. According to the story, by the mid-1960s, she faced a brutal choice: keep performing until her body gave out or step away and try to survive. She chose life. Yet the tragedy wasn't just her illness, it was what happened after she could no longer be useful on stage. Instead of long-term support, her role was quietly reduced. When the touring and spotlight ended, she was pushed into the background, doing office work at Hitsville, typing letters for the very company whose success she helped ignite. And when Motown later shifted its center to Los Angeles, she didn't go with the machine. She slipped out of the story like a page torn from the book, returning to her mother's home in Inkster, Michigan. The music she helped create stayed on the radio, but her name faded from public memory, proof that a timeless hit doesn't always guarantee a timeless life. Georgiana died on January 6, 1980, just weeks before her 36th birthday, leaving behind a legacy most listeners never fully understood. That's why her chapter hurts. She wasn't a footnote, she was a foundation. Motown celebrated. Please Mr. Postman as a milestone, but the woman who helped sing it into history ended her days far from fame, far from protection, and far from the fortune her voice helped create. In the Motown curse narrative, Georgiana Tillman isn't just the first story, she's the warning sign. Hubert Johnson. Fame turned to silence. Hubert Johnson may not be a household name today, but his voice helped shape a moment when Motown was still proving itself. As the bass singer of the Contours, Hubert stood behind one of the label's rawest, most infectious early hits, Do You Love Me, 1962, a sweaty dance floor anthem that made Motown feel young, electric, and unstoppable. It wasn't polished like the later classics. It was urgent and alive, the kind of record that turned living rooms into parties. And the video frames Hubert as more than just a member. It says he was the one who pushed for the group to get a real chance even after they'd faced rejection. In that sense, he wasn't simply along for the ride, he was helping drive the car at the exact moment the road opened up. His story becomes even more personal with the detail that Hubert was connected to greatness through family as well. He was said to be the cousin of Jackie Wilson, one of the most explosive performers in soul history. That connection matters because it highlights something the public often overlooks. Talent and legacy don't always equal protection. In the Motown universe, names became brands fast, and success could look permanent from the outside. But the inside was fragile. For Hubert, the glow didn't last. According to the transcript in 1964, something fractured inside the group, and within a short span of time, Hubert and several others left Motown almost silently. No dramatic farewell, no explanation to the fans, just a door closing and then the world moving on without him. That's when the real collapse began. The song kept living, spinning at parties, finding new life across generations, while Hubert's own life moved in the opposite direction. The video describes a long struggle with depression for 17 years, the kind that eats away quietly while everyone around you assumes you're fine because you once had a hit. He watched other Motown acts return for reunion tours, receive recognition, and cash the nostalgia checks while his name remained in the shadows. Even a last attempt at a comeback traveling to record again never became the second chance it was supposed to be. The industry doesn't always crush you loudly. Sometimes it simply forgets you until you disappear. Hubert Johnson's ending is the hardest part to hear because it contrasts so sharply with how joyful Do You Love Me still feels. He died on July 11, 1981 in Detroit at 40 years old, and the report described a death that was violent and final. Nothing like the upbeat record that made people dance. That's why his chapter fits the Motown curse theme so well. The hit became immortal, but the man behind it didn't get to grow old. And Jackie Wilson's name lingering in the story only adds to the tragedy because it reminds us that even proximity to legends can't shield someone from the loneliness that comes when the music stops and the world stops calling. Sandra Tilley, The Unmarked Goodbye. Sandra Tilley entered the Motown story in a way that rarely earns headlines, not as the star, but as the replacement. In 1968, she stepped into Martha and the Vandellas to fill the space left by Rosalind Ashford, and from the outside it could have looked like a temporary job, an emergency fix to keep the touring machine running. But the transcript makes it clear that Sandra didn't simply stand in the background. She earned her place. She performed on recordings, traveled with the group, and held her own in an era when every note and every move were judged. In a world where Motown demanded perfection, Sandra proved she belonged on that stage. For several years, she lived the life that so many young artists dreamed of: bright lights, big venues, and the feeling of being part of something historic. The video highlights moments that sound almost unreal now, singing during the Vandellas era that still attracted elite audiences, performing at legendary rooms like the Copacabana, and witnessing how Motown artists were treated like royalty when the show went right. And yet Sandra's role was always framed by what she wasn't, not the original, not the most famous name. Even so, she became a real Vandella in the only way that matters, by doing the work night after night, while Martha Reeves carried the group's identity at the front. Then the story pivots, and it hits harder because it feels like the rare Motown ending that might actually be happy. When the group disbanded in 1972, Sandra walked away from the music world completely. She moved to Texas, and built a normal life far from Detroit contracts, tour buses, and the pressure to stay camera-ready. Unlike so many others, she didn't spend the next decade chasing a comeback or begging for recognition. She chose peace. For the Motown curse narrative, that choice matters because it shows Sandra wasn't trapped. She escaped the machine with her dignity intact, and it seemed like she might be one of the few who truly made it out. But the curse, as the video frames it, isn't only about the industry, it's about how tragedy finds people even after the music ends. Around 1979, Sandra began experiencing severe headaches, and doctors discovered a brain tumor. She fought it for years, undergoing repeated surgeries and hospital visits, trying to survive a battle that had nothing to do with fame and everything to do with endurance. Sandra Tilley died on September 9, 1983, during surgery in Las Vegas after a brain hemorrhage. She was only 37. In this chapter, Sandra Martha Reeves and Rosalind Ashford represent three different roles inside Motown leader, original member replacement. But Sandra's fate delivers the same haunting message. Even those who stepped in quietly, even those who walked away, still became part of the pattern. Rick James, the shadow behind Motown. The video shifts gears in a smart way. It uses the story of Tina Marie as the doorway into Rick James, and suddenly, the Motown curse starts feeling less like a list of tragedies and more like a timeline sliding into chaos. Tina's situation is framed as both historic and uncomfortable, a rare artist who didn't fit Motown's traditional image, yet had undeniable soul. What matters here isn't the spectacle of her career, but what her experience reveals about the Motown system under Berry Gordy, a label that could create stars but could also stall them, shelve them, and treat creative momentum like something to be controlled. That tension becomes the exact crack the story needs to introduce the next major character. Because once Tina Marie is mentioned, the camera naturally turns to the man who helped unlock her sound, Rick James. The transcript positions him as more than a hitmaker. He's presented as a force who made Motown relevant again when the music world was changing fast. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, the old Motown formula wasn't guaranteed to dominate the way it once did. But Rick arrived with something rawer and louder, an energy that didn't politely ask for space, it demanded it. In this bridge section, he represents Motown's second wind funk edge rebellion and a kind of musical danger that felt alive in a new era. And that's where Berry Gordy re-enters the narrative not as the visionary builder of Hitsville, but as the executive facing a new problem. How do you control an artist who can't be boxed in? The video suggests Gordy never totally understood Rick James, and that detail matters because it turns the story into a clash of worlds. Motown was built on discipline, image, and carefully managed excellence. Rick James was built on instinct, excess, and pushing boundaries until something broke. This isn't painted as pure villainy or pure heroism. It's portrayed like a storm forming a creative genius inside a system that was never designed to handle that level of chaos for long. That's why this segment feels like a warning bell. It's a transition chapter that signals the tragedies ahead won't only be about illness or quiet neglect. They're about a different kind of downfall, pressure, conflict, and self-destruction playing out in public. Tina Marie leads into Rick James to show how Motown's later era carried a new price tag, one tied to control, legal fights, and emotional strain. By the end of this bridge, the audience can feel it. The curse is no longer just something that happened after fame. It's creeping into the center of the Motown story itself, right where the music is being made. Mary Wells. From Queen to Cast Aside. Before Diana Ross became the face of Motown, there was Mary Wells, the first true queen of Hitsville. In the early 1960s, her voice didn't just land on the radio, it defined what the label sounded like when America was first learning the Motown name. The video reminds us that Mary wasn't a supporting act, she was the headline. her signature hit. My Guy reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1964, making her one of the biggest stars in black music at only 20 years old. For a moment, she was the blueprint, elegance, sweetness, confidence, and that clean Motown polish that felt like a promise of forever. But fame at Motown could be cruelly conditional. The story pivots on one decision that looked smart in the moment. Mary left the label at the height of her popularity, chasing bigger opportunities elsewhere. The transcript frames it as a gamble, new contracts, a larger payout, the dream of crossing over into movies and a wider spotlight. Yet once she stepped away from Berry Gordy's machine, the industry changed its posture toward her. The hits slowed down. The support vanished. And what makes this chapter sting is how fast the narrative flips from America's favorite to forgotten. In the Motown universe, there was always another star being prepared in the wings, and soon that star was Diana Ross, rising into the space Mary once held. By the 1970s, Mary's career had shrunk from major stages to smaller club appearances, and the video paints the 1980s as the harshest stage of all survival. Without consistent income and without the kind of long-term protection artists deserve, Mary struggled financially while raising 4 children. Then the real nightmare arrived. Her health collapsed at the exact time she had the least support. Mary Wells was diagnosed with laryngeal cancer of the throat or voice box in 1990, a cruel twist for a woman whose voice helped build an empire. Publicly reported accounts note that fundraising efforts were organized to assist her medical costs, including support through the Rhythm and Blues Foundation. It's the kind of detail that transforms the curse from rumor into reality. Not a ghost story, but a story about what happens when artists outlive their contracts, but not the consequences. Mary Wells died on July 26, 1992, at 49 years old. And that's why her name carries such weight in this section. She didn't fall because she lacked talent. She fell because the system didn't guarantee safety after stardom, and because leaving Motown meant leaving the biggest protection shield a young artist could have at that time. Diana Ross represents the next era of Motown power and triumph, but Mary represents the warning: being first doesn't mean being saved. She was a queen before the crown became famous, and she died before she ever got the full recognition, security, and peace her legacy deserved. Eddie Kendricks, a voice worn down. Eddie Kendricks didn't just sing in The Temptations, he helped give the group its elegance. His falsetto was the silky thread running through Motown's most unforgettable harmonies, the kind of voice that could sound like a prayer one second and a celebration the next. In the video's framing, Eddie represents the class of The Temptations: smooth, controlled, timeless. When people think of that refined Motown sophistication, they're hearing the discipline Eddie carried in every note. And yet, behind the perfection, the story hints at a pressure cooker that few fans ever saw, because the Temptations weren't just a group, they were a constantly moving machine. By 1971, the machine began grinding Eddie down. The transcript points to a toxic mix exhaustion from non-stop touring power struggles and the feeling that his contributions were being erased. His conflict with Otis Williams is described as part of that breaking point internal tension that made the stage look polished, while the relationships behind it cracked. Eddie didn't leave because he stopped loving music. He left because the environment felt like it was killing him slowly. It's one thing to be famous. It's another thing to feel trapped inside a brand you helped create. And the most painful part: when the public sees a smiling legend, they assume everything is fine. For a while, Eddie proved he could survive outside the Temptations. He had solo success, including a major hit with "Keep On Truckin'," reaching #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1973. That moment matters because it shows he wasn't just a group member. He was a star in his own right. But the video makes it clear the highs didn't last forever. The hits slowed down, the money tightened, and the lifestyle damage kept accumulating. Eddie was reportedly a heavy cigarette smoker for years, something that didn't just threaten his health but threatened his identity because his voice was his entire legacy. Still, like many Motown veterans, he kept going, kept performing, kept pushing through. Because when music is all you've ever known, stopping can feel like dying. Then the comeback era arrives, and it's heartbreaking because it feels like one last stand. Eddie joined David Ruffin and Dennis Edwards on the former Temptations' Leeds tours, three legendary voices sharing the stage like living history. But in the transcript, that reunion comes with a shadow. Ruffin had already died in 1991, and Eddie's own body was failing fast. Eddie Kendricks was diagnosed with lung cancer and had a lung removed, yet he continued touring into 1992. He died on October 5, 1992, at 52 years old. In this chapter of this Motown curse, Eddie's ending isn't about mystery. It's about a slow collapse under pressure, conflict, and physical damage. The falsetto that made Motown feel heavenly didn't fade because people stopped loving it. It faded because the man behind it didn't get the protection his gift deserved. Tammy Terrell, the collapse that changed everything. Tammy Terrell's story begins like a dream. Motown would have loved to sell a young woman with a bright voice stepping into the spotlight beside Marvin Gaye, creating duets that sounded like pure love captured on vinyl. On stage, they looked unstoppable, two rising stars turning romance into music night after night. But the Motown curse chapter that centers on Tammy doesn't start with a hit. It starts with a moment that froze time. On October 14, 1967, during a performance at Hampton-Sydney College in Virginia, Tammy suddenly collapsed in Marvin's arms, mid-song. 1 second she was singing, the next, her body gave out. The crowd didn't know they were witnessing the beginning of an ending. The diagnosis came fast and brutal, a malignant brain tumor. The video describes how Tammy's life became a cycle of hospitals, procedures, and desperate hope. She underwent multiple brain surgeries over the next few years as her condition worsened. The details are painful because they erase the illusion of celebrity protection. Fame doesn't block sickness. A hit record doesn't stop a tumor. By the end, the young woman who once commanded the stage was confined to a wheelchair. Her body weakened, her world shrinking, while her voice stayed immortal in Motown's catalog. Tammy Terrell died on March 16, 1970. Only 24 years old, leaving behind music that still sounds like it was made for eternity. What makes Tammy's chapter even darker is how the transcript ties her tragedy to the violence that surrounded her. It mentions that before Motown, she had reportedly endured abuse in her relationship with James Brown, a reminder that even talented young women in the industry could be harmed behind closed doors. It also references her later connection to David Ruffin, with a long-standing rumor that he struck her in the head with a motorcycle helmet during an argument, and that some people wondered whether that trauma worsened or accelerated what happened to her. The video is careful to frame that part as uncertain. No definitive medical proof is claimed, but the timing and the whispers are presented as part of what makes the story so haunted. It's not gossip for entertainment. It's the uncomfortable reality that danger can exist right next to fame. And then there's Marvin Gaye, the man who held her as she fell and never truly came back whole afterward. The video suggests Tammy's death didn't just end a life. It cracked something inside Marvin that the world could hear later in his music and his silence. He spiraled into depression and struggled for years, carrying grief like a weight he couldn't put down. Their duets. Ain't No Mountain High Enough. You're All I Need to Get By, Ain't Nothing Like the Real Thing became bittersweet monuments because every joyful harmony now sounds like a goodbye that arrived too soon. In the Motown curse narrative, Tammy Terrell isn't just a tragic figure. She's the turning point, the fall on stage that didn't just shock a crowd, but scarred an entire generation of Motown history. Florence Ballard, cut out of her own legacy. Florence Ballard's story is one of the most painful chapters in the Motown legacy because it challenges the version of history most people grew up hearing. The video makes a bold point right away. Florence helped found the Supremes, not Diana Ross. She was the one who helped bring the group together, helped shape the early identity, and stood at the foundation before the machine decided who the star would be. In those early years, Florence wasn't chasing fame as a solo dream. She was building a team, creating harmony, and chasing a shared future. But at Motown, teamwork didn't always guarantee fair outcomes. Sometimes it only made the separation feel more brutal when the spotlight narrowed. As the Supremes rose, the industry began choosing a center, and that center became Diana Ross. The video frames Florence's decline inside the group as slow and humiliating, fewer featured moments, fewer chances to shine, more time watching the narrative shift away from the collective toward one face. By 1967, it reached the breaking point. Florence was removed from the group completely, and the name changed into Diana Ross and the Supremes, sealing the decision in public forever. The transcript describes a settlement of $139,000. But even that consolation prize came with restrictions that limited Florence's ability to profit from her own legacy. Worse, the story claims much of that money was lost due to betrayal and mismanagement, turning what should have been a lifeline into a trapdoor. After Motown, Florence tried to restart, but the door that opened for others stayed closed for her. A solo deal didn't become the comeback she needed. The video describes how quickly life shifted from fame to survival. By the early 1970s. She was reportedly on welfare, living in a Detroit housing project, carrying the kind of depression that grows when you've been erased from your own story. Her battle wasn't just financial, it was emotional. She wasn't simply a singer who lost hits. She was a founder who watched the world celebrate what she helped create while treating her like she was never essential. That kind of pain doesn't fade quietly. It hardens into isolation, shame, and the feeling that you're invisible in the same city where your voice once mattered. Florence Ballard died on February 22, 1976, at only 32 years old after collapsing and being hospitalized. Her death was linked to heart-related complications. In the Motown curse narrative, Florence becomes a symbol of the darkest truth behind the glamour. Being first doesn't mean being protected, and creating something legendary doesn't guarantee you'll benefit from it. Diana Ross represents the victory lane, global fame, career longevity, the version of Motown that shines. Florence represents the shadow lane the creator left behind when the spotlight chooses a different face. And that's why her story still hits like a warning. Sometimes the real curse isn't dying young. It's being erased while you're still alive. David Ruffin, genius in freefall. David Ruffin was the voice that turned the Temptations from a great group into a permanent legend. The video paints him like a man made for the spotlight, rough, emotional, church-trained intensity wrapped in a suit. When Ruffin sang "My Girl" or "Ain't Too Proud to Beg," it wasn't just technique, it felt like testimony. That's why his fall hit so hard in the Motown curse narrative. He wasn't a background singer who disappeared. He was the sound of a generation, the kind of lead who made audiences believe every word. And yet the same hunger that fueled his greatness also pushed him toward chaos. The breaking point came when ambition turned into a war. Ruffin wanted his name in front, David Ruffin and the Temptations. And in Motown's world, that kind of demand was unforgivable. He was fired in 1968, and the video frames the next decades as a long, unraveling flashes of solo success mixed with financial instability, damaged relationships, and addiction that ate away his discipline. While Eddie Kendricks represented elegance and control, Ruffin represented raw emotion and volatility, and the contrast makes their shared history feel tragic. Even when he wasn't on the Temptations stage anymore, his shadow never left the group. His voice lived in the catalog while the man behind it drifted further away from stability. By the early 1990s, the story takes a twist that feels like fate offering him one last chance. Ruffin reconnected with the spotlight through reunion touring, sharing stages again with fellow Temptations legends like Eddie Kendricks and later Dennis Edwards, drawing crowds hungry for that classic Motown feeling. The transcript mentions that on one of these tours, he earned serious money, reportedly $300,000, suggesting that the public still loved him, still paid to see him, still believed in the magic. For a moment, it looked like redemption, like the story would end with an elder statesman reclaiming his crown. But the curse theme isn't interested in neat endings. It follows him into the last night where everything slips out of control again. On June 1st, 1991, David Ruffin arrived in Philadelphia, and what happened next is the kind of ending that feels colder than death itself. He was dropped off at a hospital by a limousine driver who fled, and he was unresponsive. Reports state he died from a cocaine overdose, and the video highlights a detail that makes the tragedy feel even darker. His body was initially tagged as John Doe, as if the staff didn't recognize one of Motown's greatest voices. To make it worse, the transcript claims cash he was carrying went missing, adding another layer of mystery around his final moments. Ruffin was only 50 when he died. Even in death, his legacy proved undeniable. The video notes that Michael Jackson paid for Ruffin's funeral, a powerful sign of respect from an artist who grew up watching Ruffin define what a lead singer could be. But that respect doesn't erase the loneliness of his ending. David Ruffin's chapter alongside Eddie Kendricks and Dennis Edwards shows the cruelest Motown reality: you can create timeless joy for the world and still leave this life unseen, unprotected, and surrounded by unanswered questions. Marvin Gaye, the most tragic ending. Marvin Gaye's story doesn't end like a music legend's story is supposed to end. By the early 1980s, he had already changed the world with albums that carried pain, politics, and soul in a way Motown had never fully known how to handle. But the video frames his exit from the label as exhaustion, frustration, and a man running out of places to hide. He was drowning in pressure, financial trouble, emotional instability, and a mind that wouldn't rest. Even with fame, Marvin was slipping into a darker space where success couldn't protect him anymore. By 1984, Marvin was back living with his parents in Los Angeles, and the most dangerous stage of his life wasn't a concert hall. It was his own home. The conflict with Marvin Gaye Sr. had been building for years, marked by discipline, fear, and unresolved rage. According to Marvin's brother, Frankie Gaye, the tension exploded again on April 1, 1984, just one day before Marvin's 45th birthday. In the middle of another argument, Marvin stepped in and the situation turned fatal. His father went to his room, returned with a gun, and shot him. The ending is almost too tragic to process because it feels like destiny turning into a headline. Marvin died at 44, not from the streets, not from the industry, but from family violence that had followed him his whole life. Frankie later recalled Marvin's haunting final words, "I got what I wanted. I couldn't do it myself, so I made him do it." In the Motown curse narrative, this becomes the most shocking conclusion of all. A man who sang about love and healing dying in the one place that should have been safe. Motown gave the world timeless music, but these stories reveal the price. Too many legends paid behind the curtain. Illness, exhaustion, broken support systems, and lives cut short long before the applause ended. On Legends of Black Excellence, we don't call it a curse just to sound dramatic. We ask what the industry ignored while it chased the next hit. So here's the debate. Was Motown simply unlucky? Or did the system sacrifice its own pioneers to keep the machine running? And if those voices built the culture, should labels be held responsible for what happens after the fame fades?